Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Mark with Courtroom Visuals Consulting, here with another installment of PowerPoint for the Courtroom. Today's podcast will be my 16 essential rules for using PowerPoint in the courtroom. As I said in the last episode, there's a right way to use PowerPoint and there's a wrong way to use PowerPoint in the courtroom. And the last thing you want is for your jury to see that this is PowerPoint. So I've come up with these 16 rules after years of experience, after years of trials, years of preparing PowerPoints for the courtroom. And I want to go through them with you today. I want to point out that just because you're not doing things this way doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong, but the way I put these rules together, it's based on my experience and the way to create the best, most compelling, most persuasive PowerPoints without attaching the stigma that some jurors may have when they see PowerPoint coming up on your screen in a courtroom. I also want to tell you these are just stylistic suggestions. This is not legal advice. So let's go through these 16 essential steps right now. The first rule for using PowerPoint in the courtroom is to remember that PowerPoint is just the vehicle for you to communicate your message. So rule number one, the tail should not wag the dog. What do I mean by that? PowerPoint didn't go to college, PowerPoint didn't go to law school or pass the bar exam or get a job as an attorney somewhere. You did. PowerPoint can make you more effective, more compelling, and more persuasive when you are prepared, but it is not a crutch for the ill-prepared attorney. And always remember, when using PowerPoint in the courtroom, it's always substance over style. You, as the attorney, maintain the lead role. PowerPoint is used to support you, to support your witnesses. That's the goal of using PowerPoint in the courtroom. There's actually going to be a test on this rule in a few minutes, but rule number one is the tail should not wag the dog. Rule number two, when you're in the courtroom, keep your color choices simple. There are a lot of really cool templates that are built into PowerPoint. Some companies, some firms create their own templates. You can see the template I'm using is based on Courtroom Visuals Consulting, different shades of blue, and my logo's up there in the corner. I'm here to tell you that none of that stuff belongs in the courtroom. Those are distractions. Your jurors' eyes will be drawn to the slide and not the content of the slide. And you always want the jury to look at the content, not the background. When I'm in court, I use one of two background colors in my PowerPoints, either black or blue. And the color of the background is going to depend on what it is I'm showing to the jury. If all I'm doing is showing a digital image, maybe it's a photograph, or maybe it's a video file, and it doesn't take up the whole slide, my background is going to be black, not blue. Now, if it takes up the whole slide, it doesn't matter because the jury will never see the background. But the reason I use a black background for digital media is if you're going to show a photograph and you're using a blue background, you can see on the screen, you've got the blue bands on the top and bottom of this photograph, and then you're going to contrast that with the black on the sides that are either part of your TV frame or your screen if you're using a projector. And those blue bands are also a distraction for the jury. So instead of using a blue background when I'm using digital media such as a photograph or video, I change the background of the slide to black. And that way it blends in with whatever else the jury is seeing either on the TV screen or that screen if you're using a projector. That black background on the PowerPoint slide will blend in. It will not cause a distraction. You won't have that blue banding that you saw on the previous slide. So we changed the background color to black to get rid of that. And that's what we've got. My next rule for using PowerPoint in the courtroom, again, the black slide. If it's digital media, right? Let's say you want to show a video clip. Here's a video clip that I put on here. By using a black background, all the jury sees is the content. There's nothing about that background that the jury's looking at. It's always content, not background. If they're paying attention to the background, they're not paying attention to the content or the substance of the slide. So that's an example or a couple of examples of when I would use a black background on a PowerPoint slide in court. So when do I use blue? I will use a blue background, a darker blue, when I'm using text. Now you never want to use a white background. A black font on a white background is a problem for two reasons. Number one, if you're in a dimly lit courtroom and all of a sudden you pull up a white PowerPoint slide, it's going to be a little bit hard on the eyes of the jurors. It's going to be too bright. But also, black text on a white background is just harder to read in a digital format than using a white font on a darker background like blue. So why do I choose blue instead of black? Well, here's my white font, and you can see the phrase courtroom visuals on this background or on this slide, right? But I make extensive use of shadows on anything I put on a PowerPoint slide. So when you attach a black shadow to that same phrase, it's got more definition. It gives the slide some depth. It makes it look more professional. Obviously, if I had a black shadow on this white font with a black slide, you would never see the shadow. So when I'm using text, such as phrases, lists, charts, jury instructions, I switch my slide to blue and I attach black shadows to the text. Rule number 3, keep your text easy to read. You have as many font choices in PowerPoint as you do on whatever word processing program you have on your computer. And that could be hundreds of them. And there are a bunch of fonts that have absolutely no place in the courtroom ever. The goal is to make the text as easy to read as possible for your jurors. If I'm using PowerPoint in the courtroom, I'm recommending one of two fonts, one of only two fonts. The first is called Times New Roman. That is what's known as newspaper type. That's the kind of font you'll see in a printed newspaper. However, I use in my PowerPoints Arial, A-R-I-A-L, because I personally believe Arial is even easier to read in a digital format on a PowerPoint slide than Times New Roman. Even if my jury instructions on paper are typed with a Times New Roman font, when I put that jury instruction on the slide during my closing argument, I'm using the Arial font because I want the jurors to be able to read it without struggling at all. Rule number 4, avoid using all the bells and whistles that are in PowerPoint. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They kind of go off the tracks when they start using PowerPoint in the courtroom. PowerPoint has a lot of really cool features built into it, a lot of dynamic features, things that capture the jurors' attention or the audience's attention, because PowerPoint wasn't designed for the courtroom. It was designed more for the academic setting, the corporate setting. And these features are built into PowerPoint to help the speaker keep the attention of the audience. But when you are using PowerPoint in the courtroom, the task of keeping the jurors' attention belongs to you, not PowerPoint. If the jurors are paying attention to the way your words are moving on a slide, they're not paying attention to the content or the substance of that text. So watch out for all those bells and whistles. Don't use them. As tempting as it may be, don't use them. Rule number 5, avoid lengthy blocks of text, especially when we're talking about closing arguments. If you've got a document with 6 paragraphs that are important in your case, don't put that entire page with 6 paragraphs on one PowerPoint slide unless you're going to use some other skills to emphasize or highlight something on there. The jury's not going to be able to see all that text, and you don't get any bonus points for using less slides. Break those paragraphs down. Maybe use 6 different slides, a paragraph on each one, or even a smaller amount, a sentence or 2. By putting it all on one slide, it's not going to make your argument go any faster because you still have to say the same amount of spoken words. So break those large blocks of text down into simple pieces that the jurors can easily digest without being overwhelmed during your evidence presentation and your closing argument. Here's an example, right? No reason to read all this text. The main point is this is far too much text on a PowerPoint slide for any juror to be able to absorb the information, to accept the message that you are trying to give to them. So don't use a lot of text in your PowerPoint slides. And while we're talking about text on a PowerPoint slide, get rid of unnecessary, distracting labels. There are times you want some labels on a PowerPoint slide, and I talk about that in future episodes when we talk about annotations and drawing the juror's eyes to a certain part of a photograph or a certain part of a video during your argument. But if you're talking about a house as part of your closing argument, there's no reason to put above that house or above that photograph a text box that says that's the plaintiff's house. You are already telling the jury that's the plaintiff's house. By putting that text box above that photograph, it's like having a parakeet who you've trained to say that's the plaintiff's house, repeating you. PowerPoint should never be used to repeat or to echo you in the courtroom. It should be used to augment, to supplement, to support what you're saying, to back up what you're saying, not to repeat it. Rule number 6, empty space enhances visibility. What do I mean by that? Well, I've got 16 points I'm going over right now. My 16 essential rules of digital evidence. I know I can fit all 16 of those on a single PowerPoint slide if I wanted to. However, I chose to double space my bullet points because it's easier to see each point when there's an extra space between them. Here's an example of a jury instruction for first-degree murder in Illinois. When I used to get them on paper, when they were typed out, this is the way it would look. All the words would be crammed together. And that may be the way the jury gets it on paper. But when I put that instruction on a PowerPoint slide during my closing argument, I put extra spaces between every single paragraph, just because it's easier on the juror's eyes. It's easier for them to read. Here's with the extra spaces. Here's the way they're going to see it on paper. Use that extra space to help you. The same holds true for when you're putting images on a PowerPoint slide, whether it's during the presentation of your evidence or closing argument, right? Here's an example of a television screen. This is what the jury is looking at. If you put two photographs on there and you jam them into the corners, for some people, that's going to be a little bit uncomfortable on the eyes. And think about this. Let's say you just bought a brand new house and you've got two really nice pieces of artwork you wanted to display on a wall in your living room. Would you take one of those pieces of artwork and shove it all the way up into a corner where the wall, the ceiling, and the next wall meet? No, you wouldn't. You bring that down away from the ceiling, away from the adjacent wall, and the area around it kind of frames that perfectly beautiful portrait, and it's easier to look at. So instead of jamming your photographs into the corner of your PowerPoint slide, put a little extra space around them, just to make it easier for your jurors to see. You'll notice that not only did I put these photographs a little bit closer to the center, I put frames around them. You can see now there's a gray frame or border around these images and a black shadow around each of them. And that serves two purposes. One, it cleans up the image really nice. But two, it also delineates one photograph from the other when they're overlapping. If you've got two photographs overlapping and they share a color where they overlap, you're not going to be able to tell where one photograph starts and the other one ends. Here's what it looked like before, without the borders and without the shadows. Here's what it looks like with borders and with shadows. A cleaner image and better defined on a PowerPoint slide. Rule number 7, limit your slide to a single thought or concept. If you're going over 6 different reasons why your opponent's witness is lying, you might want to put it on 6 different PowerPoint slides. If you jam up that slide with too much information, just like using too much text. The jurors are not going to be able to absorb or digest the information that you're presenting to them. Here's an example of a very complicated slide, right? Again, you don't have to read any of this, but this is just way too much information on a PowerPoint slide. So make it nice and easy for your jurors to read, to understand, and that will enhance their memory of what you're telling them. And this is a pet peeve of mine. Avoid the use of abbreviations. Abbreviations are basically shortcuts. And the problem with shortcuts is jurors may have an unfavorable opinion of you if you're deciding to use shortcuts. Here's an example of an abbreviation that just really doesn't make any sense why it was done. Now, I'm from the Chicago area. I'm a Cub fan, and some of you may know a few years back we won our first World Series in well over 100 years. During the playoffs, before the Cubs actually got to the World Series, the Cubs are playing the Los Angeles Dodgers, and I'm watching the Cubs game, and I see this come up on the screen. There's a shot of a fan, and there's a graphic right in the middle of the screen that talks about the Cubs beating the Dodgers 8-4 in this game. And I'm looking at this graphic, and I'm looking at all that empty space right there. And I see on the screen, Cubs, DEF period, Dodgers, comma, 8-4. Now I'm thinking to myself, why couldn't the person who created this graphic just type up the whole word defeat? You're only saving 2 spaces, not even 3, because that period after the F takes the space of the next E, right? So you've got all this extra space, and you can't type out the whole word defeat. So that's a problem to me. If your jurors see this, there's a shortcut, maybe they think you're lazy, and maybe they have a bad impression of you. Why risk that? But even bigger, an even bigger problem right here with this type of abbreviation. In sports, DEF period means defeat. In the courtroom, DEF period means defendant. If your jurors are taking 2 seconds trying to figure out what your definition or your abbreviation means, that's 2 seconds of your argument they're not listening to. And why do you want to do that? Take the time, type out the whole word. So in a courtroom, V's don't testify, victims do. In a courtroom, POs don't recover anything, officers do. And in a courtroom, and this is my prosecutorial bent here, I apologize for those on the other side or doing civil work, DEF periods don't lie to the police, defendants do. Take the time, type out the whole word. All right, rule number 9, don't shout. This should be self-explanatory. In fact, I typed this in all capital letters. The younger generation of attorneys right now, right, when we came up with instant messaging and when texting first started becoming commonplace, you wanted to yell at somebody, you started typing in all capital letters. Here's an example of a Facebook conversation I saw a few years back. One person is talking to another person, how about because, and then all capital letters, she was there. This other person responds, didn't know that at the time, was assuming OP was correct. Shame on me for trusting info on Facebook, but no need to, and in all capital letters, shout about it. So these two people are yelling at each other on PowerPoint. And that's what all capital letters means to a younger generation of viewers, a younger generation of jurors. But the bottom line is this. In the digital context, all capital letters is just harder to read than when you capitalize appropriately. Rule number 10, know your presentation thoroughly. Know what's going to happen every time you click next. If you're starting to get more advanced features like audio files and video files and hyperlinks, know what's going to happen every time you click so you don't find yourself someplace you're not supposed to be. And you don't want to be looking like you're in trouble in front of the jury, right? So know what's going to happen every time you click, and if you get somewhere you're not supposed to be, know how to get back to a place of safety. Rule number 11, know how to set up the equipment or have help. There are a lot of people in this world still who are technophobes. They're afraid of technology. Nobody knows how this stuff works. And they would think that this bundle of cables is what's connecting your computer to the final screen that they need to look at for purpose of your closing argument. And that's not true. And frankly, in most setups, you can get by with a single cable, an HDMI cable that will transmit both your video and your audio to the system in the courtroom. In some more advanced setups, maybe you have a separate cable for video and audio so that somebody can control the level of the audio or send it to different speakers or something like that. But if you don't know how to set up this equipment, have someone nearby who knows how to set it up so you can make sure it's working properly. And if there's a problem, they can help you. Rule number 12, and this is a very important rule, and this has to do with closing arguments. When you are giving a closing argument to a jury, talk to that jury. Don't turn around and look at the screen that the jury is looking at. Hopefully this is prompting two questions in your mind, and I'm going to answer those in a couple seconds, right? So if you're giving a closing argument, you want to look the jurors in the eyes while you're talking, right? What you don't want to do is turn your back on them, right? That's the first reason why you need to talk to the jury, not to the screen, because once you turn your back on the jury, you're basically ignoring them. Why would you turn your back on the jury? But the second reason you want to talk to the jury and not talk to the screen is rule number 1. I told you it was going to be a quiz on rule number 1. And if you don't remember rule number 1, it was the tail should not wag the dog. As soon as you turn your back to the jury and start pointing to what's on that screen that the jury's looking at, you're violating rule number 1. The PowerPoint has become the lead role in your presentation or your argument, and you are now in the role of the supporting character. The roles have been reversed. The tail is now wagging the dog. You've yielded control of your argument and your presentation to the PowerPoint. That's what you don't want to do. Now, the two questions hopefully that have popped up. One, but how do I see what the jury is looking at? Well, here's what I do. When I prepare my PowerPoint closing argument, I prepare it on my laptop, and then I practice it. I look at my laptop. I don't connect my laptop to a big TV screen and practice my closing argument. I can look at my laptop and see what the jury is looking at, right? So when I'm giving my closing argument, I take my laptop and put it on a chair right in front of the jury box. Or if you have a nice courtroom setup where you have extra satellite monitors, especially one for a witness, I will move that witness monitor in front of the jury box. So I can always look forward and see what the jury is looking at behind me on the big screen. That's the first question. Question number 2. But what if I want to point something out to the jury? I want them to focus on something that's on that slide. Well, in future podcasts and in my training that I offer on my website, courtroomvisualsconsulting.com, I show you how to draw the juror's eyes to something on the PowerPoint slide. If you're using text, you can change a font color for a word or a phrase and draw the juror's eyes to that word or phrase. You can use something called callouts, where you're emphasizing part of the whole while de-emphasizing the whole. You can use annotations like arrows and circles. There are all sorts of tools and tricks to force the jurors to look at something in your PowerPoint slide without you ever having to look back at that screen. And while I'm on the topic of giving closing arguments, if you've used a PowerPoint presenter, but some people call it a clicker, and you point that at the screen, you are proving one thing, that you don't have to point it at the screen, because there's nothing on the screen that's making that work, because the receiver for that presenter or clicker is usually attached to your laptop, not to the TV monitor or the projector and screen that the jury is using to watch your closing argument. So keep your hands down where they would normally be. Just click your way through your presentation while you're maintaining eye contact with that jury. Rule number 13, just like we shouldn't use lengthy blocks of text. In closing arguments, avoid the use of long video or audio clips. Even if you've introduced a 3-minute video or a 2-minute phone call, whatever the case may be, Learn how to use media editing software. Edit your audio, edit your video, and get those 5, 6 seconds that are important or germane to the argument that you're making, to the element of law or proposition of law that you are saying you've proven or that the opposition has not proven. And just use those short clips. Otherwise, you're going to spend a minute and a half looking down at your shoes or your trial partner or the judge or the jurors to get to that 5, 6, 7 seconds. And it's going to be very, very uncomfortable for you. So learn how to use that stuff. Turn off all of your screensavers and all of your power savers in the courtroom, right? We all know that if you have a power saver on or a screensaver on, computers can hibernate. They can go to sleep. Or if your computer's been idle for 5 minutes or so, perhaps your power saver is going to kick in and you're going to have bubbles floating on top of your screen right in front of the jury. You don't want that to happen. That's the last thing you want to happen. Or maybe you found a photo gallery screensaver and pictures of your last vacation show up. Or if you're ambitious like me, you found a screensaver called scrolling marquee. And after 5 minutes, the words come flying across the screen. Is it Friday yet, right? You don't want that to happen. And as a corollary to that, never trust the battery on your laptop. I don't care how long your laptop's been plugged in your office or at home. After a few years, laptop batteries are notorious for not being able to hold charges for a long period of time. So find an AC outlet, get an extension cord if you have to, and plug that thing in so your computer or laptop doesn't die on you in the courtroom. Rule number 15, test your presentation in the courtroom where you're trying your case. It may look great in your office or at home. It may sound great in your office or at home, but it may not react the same way in the courtroom. Maybe because of the way it's connected, or maybe it's the screen resolution difference. If you've created your PowerPoint on your computer in one resolution, but the courtroom system is in another resolution, and to give you an idea what I'm talking about, think old-fashioned TV and now widescreen TV, right? If you've created your PowerPoint to look good on an old-fashioned TV, for example, 16:9 resolution, but the courtroom system is widescreen, what was once a circle is now going to be stretched into an oval, which in and of itself is not a problem. But now the photograph you put up there is going to be stretched as well, and it's not an exact copy of the photograph that's been admitted in evidence, which could run you into some trouble if your opponent catches that, right? So make sure you test it in the courtroom, make sure everything looks the way it's supposed to, sounds the way it's supposed to, and everything works properly. The last rule, be prepared for possible equipment failure. And this is probably these days the single most important reason why some people do not use technology in the courtroom. They're afraid something's going to go wrong. I don't get along with computers. Computers hate me. And it can happen. The battery on your presenter can die. If you're using a projector, the bulb can burn out, right? Your laptop can freeze. There can be any number of things that could go wrong. They typically won't, but it can happen. But I'm here to tell you that is not the end of the world. All right, so I know what you're thinking. Sure, Mark, you just showed me one horse video where a cowboy managed to save himself. I bet that can't happen again. Well, yeah, I suppose it can. Let's see here. Okay, so the point is this, okay? If you are giving your closing argument, you're finally using PowerPoint for the first time, don't freak out, right? Before you learned how to use PowerPoint, you already knew how to give a closing argument without PowerPoint. You had your jury instructions ready, you had your exhibits ready, everything was sitting there right for you, and you would pick things up during the course of your closing argument. If you're using PowerPoint, chances are you won't have to pick anything up unless you have some tangible piece of evidence. In my case, like a murder weapon or some bloody clothes. But otherwise everything's going to be on that slide and you're just going to present right through it, right? If for some reason something goes wrong, just put that presenter down and go back to doing your closing argument the old-fashioned way. And if you do that in 5 seconds, your jurors are never going to remember you had a technology problem, right? So those are my 16 essential rules. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. This has been episode 2 in my PowerPoint for the Courtroom series. Please come back and visit this podcast as often as you want. Visit my website, www.courtroomvisualsconsulting.com. I do offer training packages on there, comprehensive PowerPoint from beginning to advanced. I do offer consultation. I'd be happy to hear from you, and I look forward to talking to all of you again in the future. Thank you.